The First Descendant. It's a new online looter shooter, free to play, entering a market that's incredibly saturated with those things. We've got Destiny at home. What does this bring to the table, Sharif?
I hate to open it up with a bummer, but I don't think it brings a lot to the table. I think it brings some things, but most of them you have seen before in other games. I think the joke about Destiny at home is, I don't think is mean. I think it's fairly on point.
I can't even take credit for that. That was Connor's joke. I take it you agree with this assessment, Connor.
Yeah, it's incredibly mid. It's very much just a very standard, quite unremarkable looter shooter. It has a few points that are quite good, but it's not really enough to kind of set it apart from many other games in the same, like you said, saturated genre.
All right, okay. So it's aggressively, indescribably mid.
It's a third-person loot shooter. If you haven't seen it, it's from a Korean studio. And if you played any Korean MMO, or especially the ones that came out in the last, I would say, decade, you pretty much know what you're looking for. And by that I mean it's graphically impressive, usually a cool character creator, although we didn't have access to that this time around, or in this limited test. We've only been able to play it for a few days. So yeah, visually impressive, extremely free to play. Everything that you can pay money for, I feel like will have an opportunity for you to pay money for it. But also the problem with that is a lot of the systems here are things you have seen before, and they don't entirely make sense in this game. So there is, if you play Destiny, there is a version of the tower. There's a hub, essentially. There's a person who does a thing with runes, which are called something different in this game than any of the other looter shooter you may have played. You shoot people, numbers come out of people.
I think looking at the footage, if we can find some positive things to say about it, and I haven't played it personally, you guys have. It looked to me like the shooting was really solid. At least it looked very snappy.
Yeah, using the shotguns and sniper rifles were fun, right? When me and Sharif were playing, there was, cool moments where I would run in up close with a shotgun and he would be behind with a sniper on a assault rifle. And so cooperative play is there and it is fun, but it's not especially distinct from other games that let you do the same thing. I'd say the grappling hook's quite cool. I like that.
The grappling hook is neat, but it's the way that the character grapples onto a point and then moves there is very clunky. There's not a lot of an animation where your character is flowing. It's just your character is standing and then it's moving as it's standing to the platform, which looks really janky.
Right.
I imagine this is something, there's an animation missing there that's going to be added. But it's just the grappling hook is something that in the tutorial I was like, oh, this is cool. But then in the open world I was like, I don't really find a use for this. The thing about the shooting is I really hate when people say, oh, this game is better on co-op or it's fun in co-op, because that to me usually means that the game is not good enough on its own.
Yeah.
That you have to have other people with you to make it fun.
Yeah.
Which is a really terrible backhanded compliment, I feel like, these days.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
It is fun in co-op in the same way that shooting the shit with your friend is fun. It's not, but you wouldn't be like, oh man, I'm gonna talk to myself for a day. Doesn't really, it's not really a compliment.
I mean, you can have a good time at a funeral if all your friends are there, right?
You can watch paint dry with friends.
Shooting is fine. I was telling Connor this when we were playing. And this is I really hate to say this, but it reminds me of Anthem in the worst possible way, as far as encounter design and shooting, which is to say that the shooting in Anthem felt real bad. Enemies would just pop up. They would just start pelting you. There was no rhyme or reason for their spawns. At least in Destiny, you have these monster closets that you can see enemies are going to be coming out of. It's a little silly, but you understand it and you move past it. In this game, they just spawn almost in these invisible bubbles, and then they're just all immediately shooting at you. So you immediately have to go to cover, and a lot of the sound design and the impact and all the things around the final details of shooting really reminded me of Anthem. This could be better, and I feel like it will be in the final game. But the encounter design was definitely nowhere near as good as Destiny, or even Warframe, which Warframe likes to have enemies already in the level as you load in. This game is just does the Anthem thing, which it's just waves of after wave of enemy in your really standard objectives, and all of them are kind of appear in this sort of abrupt, like, oh, enemies are here and they're shooting at you, figure it out. And it's like, this is not really a fun encounter. Like, I'll just take cover and shoot. Like, this is not being challenged here.
One of the things that that these looter shooters all seem to have in common is that they all have like a very high concept story, or at least they have the trappings of a high concept story, but it never comes together. Like, Destiny doesn't really have a discernible plot. It's just stuff happening. And I feel like Anthem was very much like that as well. It's like, I mean, who was invested in that, right? Is that an area where this game can make any kind of headway compared to the others?
No. I mean, like, it feels really bad because
people are gonna think we're really mean.
Yeah, I mean, it sets, for what it's worth, the start of the game and like the first level you played does kind of set up the world and the forces in it quite well. You're you can pick basically one of three essentially characters with their own abilities and stuff, and these are kind of the avatars you take forward into a world which is kind of ravaged by all sorts of wars, and there are all sorts of like kind of techno gremlins and weird people with guns all over the place. But like, it's not especially like you said, Destiny doesn't have a story. I would kind of disagree. I think Destiny has a great story. I wish it was still in the game and not bolted out. But like,
I've not played Destiny since the boy from Game of Thrones was in it, so that's how out of date my information is. It might have
wow.
Fair enough.
It might have a wonderful story now.
But there's like, quite engaging sort of, there's like a clear road trip around the galaxy kind of in Destiny, and everything's kind of messed up. You kind of find that out firsthand. In the First Descendant, you're kind of thrown out in the world, and while a story is kind of given to you slowly and you kind of unlearn, like you learn about the mysteries of the world and what's going on, it's not really compelling, in my opinion. It didn't really catch me.
Is the title explained at any point?
It is.
The setup of the story is interesting. The first cutscene explains like the stakes and what the state of the world is. It's fairly interesting in the sense that, okay, I want to play this and see what happens. Unfortunately, the cutscene itself and the sort of the stilted acting of it reminded me of Mass Effect Andromeda, in that they introduced this villain and it's supposed to be very menacing, and instead it just made me laugh because it was not very intimidating at all, and it was just like some dude wearing unrealistically heavy armor in this techno world future thing, and he's just like walking around being all evil with like a really, really growling voice, like I'm very evil, and it's like, this is what? Like, this is and yeah, it reminded me, unfortunately, of another banger from BioWare, Mass Effect Andromeda, and I feel like if you're being compared to two of BioWare's worst games, something is wrong.
I mean, like, they're probably like their most forgettable game, and also their Mass Effect game that was like Galaxy of the Goat People and everyone hated it. I mean, okay, I'm struggling to prompt for things that are good.
There is an element that is similar to Warframe. I think Connor could speak to that because he plays more Warframe than I do. And that's sort of another element that I felt like a grab bag of like systems from other games that I don't know if it necessarily sort of makes sense here. But like, did you experiment with that at all, Connor? Do you see what it was
in terms of like powering up your character to like runes, like you mentioned earlier, which provide several effects to both your attacks and the character you're using. So in terms of gearing up and kind of creating this end game build, so to speak, it seems to me like it's very much like tracking down and leveling up the right components that kind of fit together. That's proven to be quite a exciting way of like creating endgame content and kind of giving justification for players to go out and play the game and find stuff and invest time and in-game currency and sometimes real currency into leveling stuff up. But I kind of felt myself unexcited of that because at the end of the day, Warframe is really, really fun to play. And I love Warframe, and it's very unique and kind of energizing, whereas I was playing the First Descendant and I didn't feel any of that at all. It felt like, was mentioned earlier, it felt like Anthem, except without the exciting sort of world and aesthetic of Anthem. Lacking the sort of juice you need to be excited by it and make you want to grind stuff out.
Not to be too mean to it, but First Descendant it's not a terrible game. It's perfectly competent. It looks really nice, but it just doesn't do enough to differentiate it from a lot of other similar games that are out there that people are already quite invested in. But if you were in the market to get into a game like that, and all the ones that are already existing are very kind of bedded down with an existing community, and there is a sense of like, if you were to start playing Destiny now, for example, you might find yourself immediately way out of your depth, not just with the mechanics of the game, but with how the community operates and all those sorts of kind of social dynamics. So is it fair to say that this could be just a jumping on point for this kind of game that exists for people who haven't yet got into one?
I mean, yeah, like it does hit the same sort of like points that the genre does hit. If you like collecting stuff, if you like gearing up, if you like third-person shooters, it like you said, it's a decent, acceptable game in that genre. I suppose one of the benefits of live service is that this game will surely get more content over time. It will surely, get more stuff that may improve on some of its issues. Like Sherif mentioned, it could be improved in some areas when it comes to, enemy spawning in, or the grappling hook, or just small things like that. So there is obviously room to improve. And like you said, because it's starting from, like, if it's having its first launch soon, if you jump on the train now, there's a whole new community, everyone's starting on the same level. So there's excitement in that, in that nature. However, is there much of a reason to jump on this other than other hugely time-consuming live service games in a similar genre? I wouldn't say so. I mean, if you are really put off by jumping onto games that have been out for a while, I mean, that's basically the big reason to get in. But aside from that, I can't really see much of one. It's all right if you want to dedicate a bunch of time to it, but aside from that, I think there are games elsewhere that can do better.
Yeah, but also I think it's a free-to-play game with really high production values, and I think that's like already going to be interesting enough for a lot of people who will not buy Destiny no matter how cheap it gets. I know because I tried to talk some of those people into playing it with me. So, like, there's actually, if you think about it, there's a real lack of that type of game that is free to play, or at least has a significant enough free component that gets people in the door. I think if that launches with, again, it's very serviceable. Nothing is super exciting, but nothing is super like, oh, this is terrible. I don't know what they're doing. And if it can do that, and then you're going in, start with the community, everyone's trying to figure it out, and it's completely free to play, I think people are going to, I'm sure, hit some of these monetization issues sooner or later. But it's free. You can just tell your friend, hey, you have 40 gigs you can download this week, and we can play together. And then once it gets to the point where it's like, oh my God, the grind is too high, I think that will be a different conversation. Sort of in a similar way to Lost Ark, in that, it's a free-to-play Diablo. In a sense, Diablo 4 is MIA, no one knows. And the people who like the Diablo 3 and maybe didn't quite get into Path of Exile or any of these other games, they wanted like a big budget, like meaty, visually impressive one of those. There was nothing, because most of these games were indie, and it's fair enough to them. And then Lost Ark came to the West, and it was like, oh, well, this is the thing that we were looking for. You have a ton of characters, and it obviously has been growing in Asia for years before that. And that was like a great meaty thing, and you could see the numbers on Steam of that game just going gangbusters. That's still sense. And I feel like this could have like a similar effect of like, oh, here's a free-to-play Destiny, everyone jump in, and then people is going to start to fall off or like hit these walls. And I feel like, yeah, it's totally serviceable for that purpose. So yeah, I think there's definitely room for it.
Like and subscribe and all that. I mean, if you want, I'm not your mum. And check out the weekly VG 24/7 Best Games Ever podcast if you quite like listening to people mugging off their boss. I should probably stop doing that, actually.